If nothing else, Rescue Team DX is effective at establishing the basics of a Pokémon mystery dungeon. Natural vistas have always been a centerpiece of the series, and the remake uses 15 years of hindsight to make some tasteful additions. The transition to 3D means the game can use a lot more dynamic camera angles and detailed establishing shots, expanding the more limited scope offered by the GBA DS originals. Bolts of lightning crackle across an expanse of yellow crags and billowing clouds at the peak of Mount Thunder. The player and partner turn their faces away from blistering cold gales as they traverse a narrow passage of wind-torn sculptures. Rays of sunshine breach the cloud layer atop Mount Freeze after our chase across the continent comes to a resolution. Xatu gets to linger ominously amidst the starry sunset of the Great Canyon. Adopting a children's storybook aesthetic, appropriate for the most kiddie-sized adventure in the series, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon continues to compellingly stylize its wondrous landmarks. The game wisely adds a whole button on the home menu to admire illustrations, accurately predicting and catering to player needs. Staying on visual improvements, while people have always had gripes regarding the Pokémon models, Rescue Team DX gets plenty of mileage out of adding little animated flourishes. Skarmory wobbles away panicked after a thorough trouncing. The partner squares up during a staring contest with Moltres. Our group in Team ACT get a whole action scene before Ninetales breaks up the fight. Rayquaza's destruction of the meteor has been made all the more extravagant. While nothing is quite as over the top as the partner's ascent up the Tree of Life in Super, DX is clearly a more cinematic viewing of the game in line with these later entries. Rescue Team DX is the first home console Pokémon Mystery Dungeon. That home console is also the Switch, a system with a fairly high user base, to put it mildly. As such, it seems a reasonable assumption that the remake is an opportunity to endear a fresh set of newcomers to the series' dungeon-crawling escapades. It's an especially sensible task for games that can be as unforgiving as Mystery Dungeon. Even the Pokémon ones, which are generally regarded to be on the easier side of the spectrum, can get pretty brutal pretty quickly. I would consider none of the Pokémon Mystery Dungeons to be easy, even less so if you try to engage with the postgame. As such, Rescue Team DX adds many quality-of-life features, in addition to mechanics introduced in Super, to make the experience more beginner-friendly. Think of things like an auto mode or wands, respectively. In my Super video, I argued that the interplay between floors and item management were more central to the Mystery Dungeon experience than the actual content of the floors themselves. I certainly still believe this, but some of DX's alterations have compelled me to amend that argument. The individual floor layouts do matter to an extent. In DX, all of the main story dungeons grant you the ability to observe where items and enemies are across the whole floor. This is probably too much information for the game to be giving us. It alters the state of play, as I found myself dodging enemies or heading directly towards items I would have had no idea were there previously. Worse yet, this information can identify key structures. Any Kecleon shop becomes instantly recognizable, usually with a 3x3 grid of items, and monster houses can be easily avoided by skipping over rooms with an unusually plentiful, haphazard distribution of items. It's not a huge deal overall, but this aid seems like a functionality that ought to remain reserved for an orb, or only appear in a handful of beginning dungeons to get you started. Mystery dungeons ought to remain at least a little mysterious. I think we've seen from this prelude that, holistically, Rescue Team DX is a competent remake which uses the improvements of subsequent entries to make the very first Pokémon Mystery Dungeon a more inviting experience. But what about that very first Pokémon Mystery Dungeon? How does it go about establishing the core foundations of the sub-series? There's really no better place to start than with the partner. Rescue Team is the first game to deal with the challenge of the partner. They are the focal point of the narrative, the character who interfaces most directly with the story's themes. But there's a unique challenge with this character that doesn't exist for any other. Consider how Pokémon Mystery Dungeon typically goes about characterizing the casts of each game. It's through the Pokémon themselves. Their species denotes what function they might be used for. Their size and appearance frequently dictates their personality traits, and their rarity as Pokémon is often leveraged to create a mystique or lack thereof regarding that character. Gates to Infinity deliberately played off of such assumptions, framing Hydreigon as a villain and Munna as a victim, a construct made plausible because of the associations we create based on the superficial aspects of that Pokemon's design. Hydreigon looks scary, Munna does not, so it reads as truthful when the game presents Hydreigon as scary. Similarly, Rescue Team makes Gengar the head of the incredibly unsubtle Team Meanies, and the primary antagonistic force in the game because Gengar is a mischievous-looking Pokemon. The rest of the character follows from that basic point. So I'm sure you see why the partner character is a much trickier beast. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon cannot rely on any of these helpful standbys when characterizing the partner, because the partner can be any number of Pokémon species, all with completely different appearances, appendages, and potential associations. The partner is effectively a disembodied voice. While this is similarly true of the player, we are a much more passive force than the partner. The player does not speak much at all, and when we do, it is almost always to further something the partner has already said, or, as is a bad habit in Mystery Dungeon, repeat information we heard 3 nanoseconds ago. Often, the most important part of the player character is the mere fact that we exist. Yet the partner remains the driver, hence why they are unanimously the ones pushing us into things, and not the other way around. We are there to help facilitate the partner's journey. The result of this disembodied constraint is that mystery dungeons have to work extra hard to ensure the partner has a clearly defined perspective and set of beliefs which propel the game. Something so distinctive their visuals can be altered without the character themselves feeling interchangeable. I've gone over the ways in which each game attempts to center the partner's perspective in prior videos. Rescue Team has by far the least pronounced partner, both in terms of personality and opinion, yet these aspects remain just as critical to understanding what the game is concerned about. Rescue Team has the best subtitle of the 4 mystery dungeons. This is because the other titles aren't that spectacular, seemingly more preoccupied with strategic marketing gimmicks than generating relevant intrigue as to what you'll be doing. Explorers of Sky refers to a tiny side story added to the post-game of Explorers of Time and Darkness, but you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone claiming Shaman's story was a positively essential addition in the first place, though I do think it's better than people give it credit for. Gates to Infinity is an advertisement for an augmented reality function that can generate dungeons if you hold up the camera to a circular object. Evidence for the rather ironic claim that the game holds a supposedly infinite amount of content. Super Mystery Dungeon was called Super Mystery Dungeon because it was a video game with a lot of stuff in it. On the other hand, Rescue Team has the best subtitle, allowing for a DX at the end, because it is actually referring to the main topic the game is interested in. What the hell is a rescue team? The concept of a rescue team is the subject on which the game reveals to us the partner's perspective. What is a rescue team good for, and what does a good rescue team look like? The first chunk of Rescue Team dedicates itself to an extended discussion of these questions. A very telling sign of the game's opinion occurs early on. In the middle of our morning preparations, we overhear Jumpluff and Shiftry talking terms. Forget it, we're not about to work for that, Shiftry declares. Shiftry's team is greedy. They don't work unless they get paid royally, the nearby Lombre summarizes. But just when all seems lost for poor Jumpluff, Team ACT steps in to set the record straight, telling Shiftry and his team that they ought to accept the request without any fuss. When the Jumpluff comes over to thank Alakazam, he responds, "No need for thanks. It is only natural that you get help." This scene gives us a very clear stance on what the values of a proper rescue team are. A proper rescue team is one which embodies selflessness and chooses to help others for its own sake. To deny aid to someone because it isn't personally lucrative enough is an abuse of the prestige that comes with being part of a team. It is for this reason why ACT are the role models of the game. It's in their name. They act when it is necessary to help someone, regardless of the danger it exposes to them personally. When Groudon begins to threaten the continent, there is no question as to what ACT will do. They will go to challenge Groudon directly, even refusing our assistance because they believe it would endanger our lives. ACT is the functional equivalent of a Pokémon superhero league. Opposite to ACT, Team Meanies is the antithesis of a good rescue team. Gengar and company explicitly bend the core principles of a rescue team to enrich themselves. In their introduction, Gengar argues that because it does not matter who takes on a request, so long as the requester receives help, it is perfectly harmless for him to take requests specifically delivered for us. Ekans lays out the scheme. If we have the cover of a rescue team, we can get away with so much more. By using the reputation a rescue team brings with it, Team Meanies can generate goodwill for themselves and draw in more people to take advantage of. Importantly, Team Meanies is not actually interested in helping people. They are much more interested in trading favors, like a group of Pokémon gangsters. When Caterpie asks us to help Metapod, Gengar butts in to deliver his familiar reasoning. It doesn't matter who does the rescuing, see? The guy that does the rescuing gets to be the hero. Caterpie insists he has no Poke to offer, but Gengar proposes that he join Team Meanies as an alternative. If you can't pay off your debts, you'll have to work them off instead, by making Gengar's team look more impressive than it really is. The partner clearly exemplifies the positive qualities of a rescue team, the same qualities that make ACT so aspirational, and Meanies so reprehensible. Introducing us to our base, the partner indicates his desire to help people as an end unto itself, to make the world a safer place for Pokémon. In contrast to Team Meanies, when Caterpie reiterates his lack of Poke to offer us in rescuing Metapod, the partner reassures him that he doesn't owe us anything in return for our help. Well, we ended up working for free, but that was the right thing to do. The most obvious confirmation of the partner's aptitude for rescuing happens right before our expedition through the Great Canyon, where we directly question why the partner would be willing to work without benefit to himself. He explains that the work is easy to want to do precisely because it is selfless, not the other way around. In other words, engaging in altruistic behavior is the goal itself. That is a desire that simply comes naturally to the partner. This is why it is simple for the partner to continue believing in us, despite his doubts, when we are accused of being the human in the Ninetales legend. To do otherwise would be to ignore the plight of someone in need of rescuing. Rescue Team demonstrates the strength of the partner's perspective. While we might not be making a tidy profit, the rescuing we engage in pays dividends in ways far more substantial than Poke. By helping the Magnemite, we expand our capacity to help more people. While this is literally true in the sense of the game introducing us to Wigglytuff's camps, it is also represented narratively. The Magnemite's assistance is crucial in completing our rescue of Diglett on Mount Steel, an operation which would have been impossible had we not helped the Magnemite first. Making friends with Jumpluff and Caterpie gives us allies, including temporary grace from ACT, when we become Pokémon non grata in the square. These figures prove essential in the eventual clearing of our name. This parsing of altruism versus selfishness should clue us in on why the Ninetales legend is such an important fixture of the game. More than Gengar's vague scheming, the Ninetales legend is crucial because it demonstrates an instantiated, concrete failure in understanding of the principles underpinning rescue teams. By running away from Gardevoir after she bears Ninetales' curse, the human in the story has used another's beneficence to his own advantage. Contrary to how the player and partner's efforts extend the reach of which people can receive help, the human's decision makes the world a smaller, less safe place. Gardevoir certainly can't help anyone anymore, and the human no longer has someone to rely on if things go wrong again. It was ultimately a short-term, self-defeating strategy. The human would make a bad candidate for a rescue team. The human does make a bad candidate for a rescue team. Helping others makes the world go round. It is a simple message, well put, befitting the logic of a Saturday morning cartoon. It is also a clear way in which Rescue Team manifests a lot of the interests the series will expand upon later. The surrounding context of most of our rescues being a consequence of pervasive natural disasters fits neatly with the series' preference for conflicts involving environmental phenomenon, rather than defined villains with sinister motivations. One of the key elements of the Ninetales legend is that the human's maltreatment of his partner throws the world out of balance, a clear alignment with the series' fascination of having abstract concepts like greed or cooperation manifest themselves tangibly in the world, often being the source of said environmental phenomenon, especially present in games like Gates or Super. Yet there are a few aspects which make Rescue Team's story not quite as affecting as the mystery dungeons which would follow. Structure is a big one. I've discussed before how the series backloads most of the story's critical revelations by spending the first 2/3 of the games primarily on routine building and smaller slice-of-life stories. But we can get a little more granular with the structure. We have our introduction, then a fairly sizable gap, full of that routine stuff I mentioned, until we reach a sort of prolonged critical expedition. In Explorers, this would be Fogbound Lake. In Gates, this would be the first trip to the Great Glacier, and in Super, this would be the transition between Serene Village and Lively Town. Thereafter, there's another gap in time, usually shorter than the first, until we reach the big status quo shift and the routine is broken. I went over these moments in my Explorers video, so I won't repeat it here. Then one tiny gap of time before the finale, though the 3DS entries omit this part. Rescue Team's structure is simpler. There is no Fogbound Lake equivalent in this game, so instead the routine breaker moment, that being the Fugitive arc, is shifted much earlier in the timeline, a measly 4 hours into the game, and there's now a much longer gap between the ending of the Fugitive arc and the finale. There are a number of disadvantages with this approach. For one, the routine breaking that acts as the psychological appeal of this backloaded structure can't be fully realized when the routine hasn't been allowed to germinate in the first place. To return to my Explorers metaphor, the strength of the afterimage will be fainter the less time you spend looking at the original stimulus. Secondly, there's something about the nature of the Fugitive arc that doesn't lend well to being so early in the game. It is, in premise, an arc based on the idea that our friends and allies in Pokémon Square have turned against us. It should feel like betrayal, but because Pokémon Square and its residents are so thinly drawn, this betrayal feels more intellectual than anything else. Who should we be upset by to see them hunting us down? Ironically, the most distinguishable character thus far is Gengar, but he's the one character we would expect to dislike us. No, the Fugitive arc would be much better served, I think, if the game simply combined a majority of the game's 2 gaps so that the Fugitive arc leads to a tiny gap of 2 to 3 days, then straight into the finale. This would give us roughly 2 to 3 extra hours to spend in Pokémon Square before the Fugitive arc. Now, it might seem like this would be too little excitement for too long, but remember Rescue Team is the shortest Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, so combining these gaps would actually result in a time roughly equivalent to the time until the first Great Glacier trip or leaving Serene Village. It also, of course, matters what we do with those additional 2 hours in Pokémon Square, because what it is right now is bizarre. The second gap in Rescue Team is not much else besides a tedious manky fetch quest that has us redo the same dungeon several times for the same item, and a few ominous scenes about Team ACT not returning from their battle with Groudon. Very little of this feels relevant, nor does it advance the story's ideas in a way that wasn't established in the preceding 6 hours. Ideally, we'd instead want to utilize this extra space to spend some more quality time with the residents in Pokémon Square who will soon betray us. Another reason why the second half of the game feels somewhat deflating is that Rescue Team is sort of a clumsy game overall. It rarely seems to think in the long term, spinning up awkward narrative swerves that serve the immediate moment decently but are kind of nonsensical in the broader picture. Take the Ninetales legend. Wishcash tells us part of the legend is that when the human is reborn as a Pokémon, the world's balance will be upset. The explicit purpose of this part in the legend is to arouse suspicion of the player, being a human turned Pokémon, implicating us as the reason why there's been an uptick in natural disasters. This is the basis on which we become pariahs in Pokémon Square. But at the end of the Fugitive arc, it's revealed that this entire section of the legend was bogus. It is true that I foretold of the world's balance becoming unstable. However, that human becoming a Pokémon and the world's balance, they are not linked in any way. This is a ridiculous word game Rescue Team is playing with us right now. Technically speaking, Ninetales' interpretation follows the letter of the legend. The human turning into a Pokémon and the world being thrown out of balance is phrased by Wishcash as a mere conjunction of events, not causally related ones. But this reading obviously defies the spirit of what we were being told. Effectively, Ninetales' clarification means the fugitive arc is predicated on manufactured drama, a slip of the tongue, a miscommunication. Of course, in hindsight, this revelation is unnecessary. A game like Gates figured out how to causally connect disparate ideas like these. The human's behavior would in fact cause natural disasters, because the world would physically react to acts of selfishness. The cosmos would be so upset with Gengar, it would literally bring a meteor down on his head as punishment. It sounds ridiculous, but is this not exactly how a Pokémon Mystery Dungeon plot would play out? There are other clumsy moments. The end of the Fugitive arc is marked with a disorienting pivot into defeating Groudon. Groudon will be awakened, Ninetales warns, as if that's supposed to be a big reveal. This is the first time Groudon has ever been mentioned. The ending of the game feels similarly awkward. After an entire journey of receiving no solid evidence for why the natural disasters have been occurring, we suddenly get in telepathic touch with Xatu to inform us that there has been a giant meteor on a collision course with the planet this whole time. But why are we finding this out only now? What caused Xatu to only now see it? How has the game been building up to this giant meteor all along? It feels like a last-minute pivot for no other reason than the game has decided it is time to end. So clearly, Rescue Team is trying to find its footing. It's frustrating because Rescue Team was doing a pretty good job right until the top of Mount Freeze. It has clear thematic interests within the concept of rescue teams, develops those ideas solidly, and has characters that support said ideas. But then it just falls apart for some reason. It reminds me somewhat of the last third of Super, but the plot of Super was well telegraphed and excitingly orchestrated. My problem with Super was only that I felt it had difficulty developing a coherent thematic through-line linking dark matter to the rest of the game. Rescue Team seems to struggle to connect even its basic plot beats together, which would be forgivable if the finale really hammered home its themes well, but it doesn't do a particularly good job at that either. By far the clumsiest part of Rescue Team is the relationship between Gengar and Gardevoir. There's something peculiar going on with this subplot, and not at all to the game's benefit. The strangeness rears its head in one of the dream sequences the player has with Gardevoir. I fell under the curse of Ninetales in place of a trainer, and became a presence without a physical form like this. A trainer? You mean the human that was in the legend about Ninetales? It's awful that your trainer would abandon you and run away. Yes, my trainer was a terrible person. Hold on. Trainer? That's a shocking word to hear in a Pokémon Mystery Dungeon. In fact, it's a word never uttered in any other Pokémon Mystery Dungeon beyond this one. Rescue Team is clearly using this term to tie itself directly to the mainline Pokémon games, but in doing so brings with it some unwelcome baggage. Mainline Pokémon is very concerned with the bond between trainer and Pokémon. In some instances, this interest manifests itself in reasonable ways, similar to Rescue Team's analysis of rescue teams, that through cooperation and understanding, trainer and Pokémon enter a mutually beneficial relationship. Other times, however, the series takes a much more essentialist view, that there exists some natural relationship between trainer and Pokémon woven into the fabric of the universe, and that all Pokémon, as a matter of their nature, enjoy the companionship of a trainer. Pokémon just inherently enjoy the institutions of catching and battling. Put more bluntly, the mutually beneficial bond between trainer and Pokémon is an assumption the mainline games make on the aggregate. How is all of this relevant to Rescue Team? Because the game is importing this same assumption about humans and Pokémon directly. Even the very notion that Gengar is Gardevoir's trainer speaks to this. In a world constituted almost entirely by Pokémon, where humans are either considered extinct or a myth, the word trainer should be utterly devoid of meaning. How would Gardevoir even understand this concept? Nevertheless, the game doesn't ever explain what it means by this term. It assumes even we understand what it means. Much as how Gengar was selected to be an antagonist based on the design of the Pokémon, this trainer relation being unusual doesn't even register because the game is playing off of the ingrained assumptions already formed. Because Gardevoir was hanging out with a human, that human must obviously be her trainer, because in the universe of Pokémon, that is the typical arrangement between these two groups. There's a more important question we need to be asking here, though. What is achieved by establishing the bond between Gengar and Gardevoir as that of a trainer and his Pokémon? Here we arrive at the baggage I mentioned earlier. If the trainer is facing danger, it is our duty to protect the trainer with our lives. We Gardevoir are that way. I kept my trainer safe. That alone was enough to make me happy. Sounds definitive enough. Gardevoir acted in the manner she did because it is in the nature of Gardevoir to protect their trainers. It's sort of a strange sentiment on its face, treating a trainer like it is an ontological category, but it certainly doesn't seem like she's extending her claim to the nature of all Pokémon. Or is she? There's more we can glean from Gardevoir's speech. When we ask why Gardevoir doesn't hate her trainer, she responds, "Well, I wonder why myself. I don't quite understand. My trainer did some terrible things, but I can't bring myself to feel hatred." Gardevoir simply has no explanation for her feelings. Despite thinking he was a terrible person, she felt a bond with her trainer that couldn't be broken. This moment has a direct parallel, the partner's attitude towards us, the player. When we ask why he helped us escape Pokémon Square despite his doubts, the partner responds with something equally ineffable. I wonder why. I really don't know why. But it doesn't matter now. Player, you're a really good sort. You know, before, when I first got the idea to start this rescue team, I met you in the tiny woods. Now that I think about it, there was something different about you. Just a feeling. This is kind of weird, isn't it? But I believe in you. Just like Gardevoir, it's almost as if the partner felt compelled to help us. But the real glue that binds everything together are the bookends of Gardevoir's speech, this concept of playing a role. She begins by describing her role. As an agent of spirits, I must watch over you, because that is my role now. She ends with a similar appeal to the player. All things have a role. They all serve a purpose. Just as I have my own role to play, you too have a role to fill. You have come here to perform a certain role, and for that role, you became a Pokémon. This is mystifying, isn't it? This idea that we all have an assigned, defined role in the world that ought to be adhered to. How might we come to know what this role is? Gardevoir gives us the answer. I live on this way with pride in the role I have been given. Indeed, pride is a word the last third of Rescue Team is infatuated with. When a self-made group fails to rescue ACT from Magma Cavern, the other rescue teams in the square become hesitant. The partner then re-emphasizes the values of a good rescue team, leading to an important realization. Never giving up. That's what our team takes pride in. We all forgot the most important thing. We are rescue teams. Pride. We have it too. Pride as rescuers. Thank you, partner. You stopped us from throwing away the most important thing we have. Pride. After beating Groudon in the Magma Cavern, Alakazam explains what this accomplishment means. Your team is a first-class rescue team. Take pride in that. By identifying the source of pride, we can deduce the role these characters are supposed to play, and it would seem that being a good rescue team is an intense source of pride for Pokémon. How are we to make sense of all this? It should be simple. Pride is an important quality for a rescue team to have because it facilitates the virtuous aspects of being in such an organization. Namely, pride gives you a reason to be willing to help others even if it does not benefit you. But invoking the inherent bond between human and Pokémon, as well as this notion that fulfilling an ordained role brings pride, adds a new shade to our interpretation. Gardevoir's speech threatens to recontextualize our entire understanding of Rescue Team. It implies that the assigned role of a Pokémon is to assist, to be helpful, to rescue, and that Pokémon will naturally want to form rescue teams as a byproduct of the fact that they are Pokémon. It is for this reason why we ourselves had to become a Pokémon to save the world. Saving the world is not in the domain space of the human role, and thus inadequate for the job. Furthermore, our partner's inexplicable fondness for us is not based on some desire to achieve an altruistic dream, but due to the fact that there exists an essential connection between human and Pokémon, and he is obligated to protect us as his role. Gardevoir protected her trainer because that is what a Pokémon ought to do, and she continues to feel pride even as a spirit because she can continue to help a human in her new role. In this way, Rescue Team attempts to cast the relationship between us and our partner as trainer and our Pokémon, just as if we were in a mainline Pokémon game. On the opposite side of the spectrum, Pokémon who join a rescue team for greedy reasons, like Shiftry, are not incorrect because they do not resemble the positive values of a rescue team, but merely because they are not properly fulfilling the role assigned to them as Pokémon. It is only natural Jumpluff should get help, remember. It is interesting that the game foreshadows Gengar as being a human by having him create the only outwardly malicious team in the game, something that should be against the nature of a Pokémon. What's more, the lesson the game wants Gengar to learn is completely different than that of the other characters. Gengar does not need to learn about pride in his role, or the proper values of being in a rescue team. No, he needs to learn a sense of gratitude for all of the assistance he has received. That is the role of a human, which forms the complete assumption, doesn't it? The trainer-Pokémon dynamic is mutually beneficial because it is assumed that each party fulfills their imposed role. Pokémon take pride in helping, while humans are grateful for the help they receive, demonstrating their gratefulness with affection. And according to Gardevoir, it would be better for all of us to oblige these roles. The problem with this analysis, though, is that it is obviously incorrect. By the game's own logic, it is anathema. What better argument against the idea that all things have a role than Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX? What is the player character if not a complete rejection of this premise? Rather than sticking to the role given to us, we, a human, are able to assume the role of a Pokémon. And despite Gardevoir repeatedly claiming that we will part ways once our role has been completed, we manage to defy that too. Rayquaza tells us we must take charge of our destiny, but that is impossible if all of our actions are in service of us achieving our species-dictated agenda. No, Rayquaza is right. Over the storied course of our lives, we don't have prescribed roles to complete, but considered choices to make. At the end of Gengar's subplot, we enter his dreamscape in a scene mirroring the intro of the game. Whereas we were asked questions to ascertain what kind of Pokémon we were to become, this scene has us answer questions about the kind of Pokémon Gengar was and has been. But our judgments in the end are not based on how well he fulfilled his role as a trainer or human or Gengar, but the choices he made as an individual. But why does the game limit this discussion to only the two human characters? Is all of this taking charge of destiny and swapping roles and making choices stuff a right only afforded to humans, to trainers? Are Pokémon destined to remain humankind's all-powerful minions until the end of time? Gardevoir's scene offers us an assumption that is poisonous to the game's themes. The game does not realize it has brought these implications upon itself because all it's trying to do by emulating this stale line of logic is make a cute little reference to mainline Pokémon. But truly, this character is a farce through and through. Gardevoir's situation is so clearly awful they have to dedicate an entire scene just for her to pop in and explicitly reassure us that, actually, she's totally okay with having zero agency and being in the service of humans for the totality of her life. And for some reason having all of her memories wiped when she's released from prison so that she ends the game a complete blank slate, because that is her role to fill as a Gardevoir. Yeah, no. At least explorers reserved this sentence for Darkrai. We should have been rescuing Gardevoir from Ninetales' cruel and unusual punishment, not consigning her to it. Rescue Team would be immensely better if it did not have this particular scene in it. It is a good thing that subsequent entries will do away with this trainer nonsense entirely. By the time of Explorers, Grovyle and the player are simply equal partners and friends. It doesn't need to be any more profound than that. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon does not need to lean on its parents to prove its worth. Time has shown that much. Ask any fervent PMD fan what they think of the series, and it's not uncommon to hear the sentiment that Pokémon Mystery Dungeon is in fact better than the main series games. I do not believe they are lying in this response. Mainline Pokemon will often talk a big game about self-actualizing in harmony with the community around you, to grow by learning about the world and its peoples, to forge strong connections defined by friendship and camaraderie. Yet these messages feel increasingly hollow the more frequently they're given, because the central and nigh exclusive way mainline Pokemon demonstrates these ideas is through adversarial winner-take-all competition, beating people up to become a champion. The games can and do protest this interpretation, but that is at base what is occurring. You could just as easily swap the ethos of Pokemon to be about domination or supremacy, and it wouldn't take much adjusting for that to feel like a more accurate assessment of the events happening on screen. This is why Pokemon is so intent on directly spelling out the special bond that exists between humans and Pokemon. How would we know otherwise? Would we be able to deduce this special bond if the games didn't explicitly point it out to us at every available opportunity? It's a thin veil of plausible deniability. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon takes a markedly different approach. The core gameplay revolves around helping and assisting others. Our prowess increases not by winning, but by helping the most people we can and taking on the most challenging requests. The more inconvenient it is, the better. In turn, one good favor returns another, and the people we've helped become inspired to help those around them, asking to join us on our mission. On premise alone, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon actualizes the stated ethos of Pokémon more intuitively than any other Pokémon game to date, spin-off or otherwise. And so when the sub-series in its didactic fashion inevitably turns around and tells me that cooperation is valuable, that doesn't feel like contradiction or rationalization. That just feels like what these games have been about from moment one. As I sunset my coverage on Mystery Dungeon, I'm tempted to point out what a remarkable accomplishment these games are. When starting with Super, I had not played Explorers. To be honest, the overwhelming word of mouth made me genuinely skeptical. I thought it was going to be a fine enough game, but nowhere near deserving of the endless plaudits it still receives. And you know what? After playing it, it was a little bit of a banger, wasn't it? Which could aptly describe all of them. Aside from one or two ill-conceived moments, here's a series composed of nothing but bangers. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon shows that Pokémon does not have to be such a one-trick ponyta. Place these creatures in an environment where we can interact with them in ways beyond battling, give them stories that can take up space and explore their personalities in more specific ways, and the appeal of it all doesn't suddenly fall apart. No, if anything, you get the next evolution of Pokémon.